Have you ever wondered how a city is born? It comes from simple ideas and dreams. In Warrenville's case, it was the desire of Julius Warren and his family to tame the newly opened frontier in the woods and prairies of northern Illinois. The city of Warrenville traces its roots back to 1833, when Julius Warren staked out a land claim next to the DuPage River. But from that very humble beginning in 1833 to today, 175 years later, a varied and colorful journey has taken place. Let's begin a trip through history and follow Warrenville's growth from the small settlement of the Warren family to the vibrant suburb of today. Coming from New York, the Warren family, led by Father Daniel, moved to the prairie lands of Illinois. Listen to the words of Sarah Warren Carpenter as her autobiography tells of this move to an area that is now McDowell Woods.
In the spring of '33, the Western fever was raging pretty high, and my father and brother-in-law, Frederick Bird, came to Chicago and out west near Naperville. My mother was all the time opposed to moving west onto a farm with a family of 7 girls and 1 boy. We moved into a little log shanty, 6 logs high with slab and plank floor with outdoor or window, chinked up with prairie hay. We stayed there 6 weeks and did our cooking outside with a log fire, while Father was building a framed house getting lumber from Chicago. We were delighted with the country and never dreamed of being homesick.
After having staked his claim on the DuPage River during his first visit, Julius returned to first build a fine home for himself. Then he built a sawmill and began helping fellow settlers construct their homes by milling lumber from the vast woods surrounding the DuPage River area. Eventually earning the title of colonel for his leadership in the community, Julius continued to expand his settlement and built the Warren Tavern, which quickly became the centerpost of social activity so important in those days. Julius was Warrenville's one-man show, acting as surveyor, developer, land baron, postmaster, census taker, spokesman, and innkeeper. But his thriving settlement was to face some challenges. The education of the town's youth became a primary concern. Since Colonel Warren's sister, Sarah Carpenter, the first school teacher in Chicago, was not available, he brought in his cousin, Seraph Warren, to teach in Warrenville. Later, Seraph would open the prestigious private school, the Warrenville Seminary, where students came from as far away as Chicago to attend class. While classes for the public school started in the basement of the Methodist Church, the first public school building, a one-room schoolhouse, was built in 1883. The Civil War fell upon the country in the 1860s. Chicago was originally built as a military base known as Fort Dearborn. Many young men from Illinois traveled south to join in the battles, including 50 soldiers from Warrenville and the surrounding farms, 17 never to return alive, one of whom was the nephew of Colonel Warren, Ashley Carpenter. From the diary of Ashley, we feel the pulse of the nation as this young soldier marches off to war.
While passing through a town named Seymour between Indianapolis and Louisville, the generous people gave us all they had in the edible line, for which by me they will long be remembered. A passing observation swelled my heart with gladness to see the expression of patriotism prevalent along the road. And the ovation was so universal that my patriotism never was so aroused.
As the 1800s came to a close, the city of Chicago was hosting the Columbia Exposition, while the small village of Warrenville was on the verge of disappearing completely. The second grist mill was destroyed by a fire in 1897, and only one business, the general store, was open as the turn of the century approached. Even the post office was moved out of town. Enter William Manning, a lawyer by day in Chicago, who had a plan for developing Warrenville into a thriving community. As the 20th century began, so did Warrenville's growth, thanks in part to Mr. Manning. This cunning lawyer put into action a planned development of 300 acres of his farm into a train depot, housing, and business locations. In 1902, the Aurora, Elgin, and Chicago Railway began its run from Chicago to Aurora. One had to look quickly to see the Manning Depot in Warrenville, as there were only a total of 53 buildings in Warrenville at this time. About this same time, the first horseless carriage, or what we call the automobile, made its first startling appearance in Warrenville. With the train now running, a flurry of growth ensued. Local farmers would ship their milk to market via the train. Even the post office made a return in 1910. In 1913, Seraph Warren Holmes School was dedicated on Labor Day with a baseball game, luncheon, and a parade, chairman of the ceremonies being none other than Ralph Manning. Warrenville's community seemed to be securely in a growth pattern. In 1921, sports came to Warrenville as the Cyclones baseball team was organized. After 50 years of fielding assorted teams to play ball on an informal basis, a group of young men in Warrenville emerged, all outfitted with the same standard uniform bearing the intimidating name Warrenville Cyclones. The details of the organizing process, how it was instigated, who provided the uniforms, how the name was chosen, who managed the team, all are unknown. Longtime resident Denny Rogers remembers going to see his dad, Swede, play for the Cyclones.
During the Warrenville Cyclone baseball leagues back in the early 50s, Lucky John Dorio, who owned the Sinclair station up at Warrenville Road in Winfield, he'd go around and collect 25 cents from all the fans to collect money to pay for the bats and balls for the Warrenville Cyclone team.
In 1924, celebrated artist Adam Emery Albright and his wife Clara arrived in Warrenville, and eventually, along with his twin sons, Ivan La Lorraine and Malvin Marr, established what would become the famed Albright Gallery of Painting and Sculpture. Janet Gale Rogers reminisces about this famous art trio.
The Albright family bought a house in the so-called downtown area, formerly belonging to my husband's grandfather. The twins' father was our landlord for several years, as he owned a Spanish-style house near where Swede Rogers lived. The father, Adam Emery, painted a lovely large oil of two little boys fishing on the DuPage riverbank, formerly shown in the Art Institute in Chicago.
The Albrights painted in Warrenville for 3 decades, often using local residents as models. Ivan went on to become very well known after painting the hideous picture for the movie The Picture of Dorian Gray, while Malvin became known for his sculpting. 1927 was a landmark year, as Warrenville's first public library was established in the post office, although most people remember the library located in the community building. St. Irene Catholic Church held its first Mass in Holmes School. Alexander Graham Bell's invention made its way into Warrenville in 1928 as Illinois Bell Telephone Company opened an exchange with 115 telephone numbers in the town. The first operators would answer calls anytime, night or day, and at times personally drive messages to individuals with no phones. Leon Schmidt, city historian, wrote an account of the memories Marion Glass shared with her.
Whenever any calls came in for someone who did not have a telephone, it was part of her job to provide messenger service. About 2 or 3 years after she started, in the middle of the night, she received a call from Chicago for a man living at the end of 2nd Street. She and her husband got into their car to deliver the message. They knocked at the door for a long time before the door was finally opened, but for only a crack wide enough for a hand pointing a gun, while a voice asked what they wanted. After giving the Chicago operator's number they were to call, they made tracks for their car. But before they left, they saw a black limousine leave from the rear of the house, headed toward Chicago.
In 1927, the first of 7 attempts to incorporate Warrenville as a village was soundly defeated by a vote of 158 to 56. No recount was required in this contest. 1931. The Bucket Brigade saved the Warrenville Bank building from being destroyed, as many account holders were relieved to find their money unharmed by the blaze. But the Baptist Church, built in 1857, couldn't be saved when it caught fire in 1935, and that's when the idea of a Warrenville Fire Protection District began. In 1933, Player Dairy was established on Warrenville Road by the river. see the USA in a Chevrolet became possible in 1933 as Frank Bear's Garage becomes an authorized Chevrolet dealership. Door-to-door salesmen actually brought cars for you to test drive, and service stations started popping up all over town. With the Depression looming over the nation, 1935 brought hope in Warrenville as the WPA began the construction of the community building, which was eventually dedicated in 1939. Headlines were made, literally, as Warrenville's first newspaper, the Warrenville News, started rolling off the presses in 1939. Also, a rest home for Chicago Telephone Company operators that opened in 1928 becomes the Cenacle, a retreat for Chicago nuns. Seems the west suburbs were very relaxing for Chicagoans even in 1939. The grand opening of Ruzicka Drugs occurred on January 17, 1940. This pharmacy and local coffee shop and town gathering spot served the community for 40 years. The 1940s brought World War II. Over 240 Warrenville soldiers served our country, 3 of whom were lost in battle: Donald Brinkman, Everest Johnson, and John Green. The 1940s also brought the expansion of Warrenville's religious community, as many churches were either established or expanded during this decade. In August of 1946, the Warrenville VFW Post 8081 was formed. This institution has served the community for many years, organizing social events for young and old, from Easter egg hunts, 4th of July activities, to carnivals, to dinner dances. They continue to be especially appreciated for their contributions to Veterans Day and Memorial Day services, as well as their presence in parades. In 1950, Dr. Mary Bremy opened the city's first medical building in July, reflecting the growth that not only Warrenville would experience in the 1950s, but the USA as a whole. She started the first mental health clinic in the area, and today that building houses Warrenville Youth and Family Services Counseling Center on Batavia Road. St. Irene School opened in 1953, as the baby boomers born of the war era were now entering grade school. 1957, the year that brought us Elvis Presley's first hit single, is marked in Warrenville by the shutdown of the Chicago, Aurora, and Elgin train line, leaving passengers stranded. And yet another attempt to incorporate the city is voted down. The official U.S. Census report for Warrenville in 1960 shows a population of 3,134 individuals calling the city their home. As businesses grew and new ones sprouted in Warrenville, in 1962 the Chamber of Commerce was established. The year that brought us the landmark Beatles album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band and The Summer of Love, Warrenville finally incorporated in 1967 on the 7th attempt. Our first mayor, William Stafford, was elected, and in the following election, our first city council took office along with Lucy Bernard, our first city clerk, and they began the awesome task of creating a city government. With nearly 1 year of city government under its belt, it was time to celebrate in 1968. As Neil Armstrong took a giant step for mankind, Warrenville began remodeling the now defunct CA&E Railroad Station into the new municipal building. In 10 short years, the population of Warrenville now stood at 3,854 in 1970. The development of the Thornwild community in 1972, followed by the construction of the Summer Lakes community in 1973, pointed Warrenville's growth in a positive direction. As the USA celebrated its 200th birthday, septic systems would become a thing of the past in the older parts of Warrenville as the City Council accepts an EPA grant for new sewer lines in 1976. 1977 brought us landmark films like Star Wars and Saturday Night Fever, and also brought a landmark discovery of a 10,000-year-old woolly mammoth in Warrenville at Blackwell Forest Preserve. The remains are now on display at Fullersburg Woods Forest Preserve of DuPage County. The growth of Warrenville was marked in the 1980 census as 7,519 people called this western suburb their home. The 1980s marked a significant time period for Warrenville as the marvelous world of cable TV is introduced in 1981. The city celebrated its 150th birthday in 1983, with celebrations spanning from 1982 to 1984, including a Sesquiball, an Old Settlers Picnic, and the play Come Fly to the Prairie, just to mention a few. The Historical Society is formed, followed by renovations to the Albright Building and the opening of the Historical Museum. In 1985, Vivian Lund began her first of 5 terms as mayor of the city. Under her leadership, the city experienced an incredible amount of change and growth, built on the foundation laid by former mayors John Huditz and Rich Volkmer. All this new development has provided a long-term financial base to ensure Warrenville's viability through the 21st century without losing our hometown appeal. The library received a $250,000 grant for a new building which opened in 1987, followed by the hiring of the first city administrator and completion of the community building renovations in 1989. In 1990, Warrenville's population had grown to 11,333. In 1991, the Warrenville Development Limited Partnership was formed on April 18th to begin development of the old Elmhurst Chicago Stone Quarry property, the single largest undeveloped parcel of land left in DuPage County by this point in time. Cantera, the Spanish word for quarry, was selected for this massive undertaking. The I-88 tollway exchange for Cantera at Winfield Road opens in 1994, marking the first time that a major interchange was put into place well before construction of a development like Cantera was to begin. The end of the 1990s saw approval for construction of the new City Hall and police station facilities, thanks in part to the TIF funds and increased tax base from the Cantera development. The 21st century will bring with it continued growth and prosperity for Warrenville, beginning with a new Hubble Middle School to be ready for students in the fall of 2009. Plans to meet the continued needs of Warrenville's residents and businesses in the next century are already taking shape under the leadership of Mayor Dave Brummel and the City Council. Only time will tell what future history is in store for Warrenville. Well, we've come a long way since the 1940s, when we got our nickname Diddy-Wah from the old Phil Harris song the conductor sang to the high schoolers riding the CA&E train home from Wheaton. Did I tell you about the place called Do-Wah-Diddy? It ain't no town and it ain't no city. It's just awful small, but awful pretty. That's Do-Wah-Diddy. In 2008, we're more than a town. We're now a city, but still kind of small, but awful pretty. That's Diddy-Wah.
Thank you for doing this interview and taking time out. I want to talk to you about the research that you've done concerning the Warren Tavern, but also just in general. Now, you have researched Warrenville in general, am I correct?
Absolutely. That was my interest. I moved here from Chicago in I was interested in what was obviously an old town, and I tried to find out how it was started and everything I could about it, first going to the libraries, and of course there was no history of Warrenville had ever been written. It was necessary to search out county histories and pick up little pieces from here and there. In those days there were no Xerox machines in the library, so I used my shorthand to great advantage. I would copy pages and pages and then go home and transcribe them. That was the first start, and then my husband, Al, is a native of DuPage County, in western DuPage, and he's lived in Warrenville since 1937. And so he knew practically everybody here. It was smaller than it is now, and he was worked at a garage, Raker's Garage. And you do come in contact with a lot of people when you're in business. So he was able to direct me to the right people who would know the older residents. Some of them, of course, were very cooperative. Others really extended themselves. They were glad to talk to you and tell you what they know. One concern of mine always was that didn't seem to be anyone from the Warren family around. The founder, Julius, was a bachelor, and his 7 sisters, they married and moved away. It had been a long time since any of the family lived around Warrenville, I found out. And one day a break came to me from Mary Mack, who was connected with our cemetery. It seemed like one of the carpenter's ashes was being shipped from California to our cemetery, and she'd been in correspondence with a woman about it. And when I heard that, I knew right away that Carpenter was one of the Warren family. And I got the name and address of this woman, and she answered my letter, and she supplied me with so much information that she had received from her family. I was able to get family pictures. Before that, there was nobody who could even remember seeing a picture of the colonel. And that led to correspondence and visits, and she was very helpful in giving me other names. Besides library work and contacting residents and whatever family I could get in contact with, I went to bookstores. Actually, I wasn't aiming to do any writing. I was merely trying to collect information so that there would be sources of Warrenville history available for anyone who wanted to delve into it. I would go to other libraries throughout the country on vacation and visit cemeteries. Then more recently, maybe 10 years ago, 10 or 12, something like that, a wonderful break came in the discovery of some old diaries of Hiram Leonard, who was the town busybody. He was a postmaster at one time, and he conducted a store, and he was a politician. He served in various capacities. He was a bachelor until about 4 years before he died. He kept a record of every movie made, and especially the weather. And the diaries that turned up were from 1843 to 1874. He was here in 1835, and we're still hoping that the missing years will turn up. The writing was very difficult, and I transcribed all of them. I just finished them a few months ago, and I had them bound. And they have proven a marvelous source of information on the town in a period when there are no newspapers published or just scattered issues here and there in libraries. There is some information in there about the tavern and the tavern's owners, and I drew on it quite heavily for the 40s and the 50s. Nothing was really known of the Grants before I found it in these diaries, for instance.
Now, the photographs that you mentioned, are they available to be seen? Are they at...
They're at the museum now. I've turned most everything like that over to the museum. We've had our museum for about 10 years now.
Okay, want to pause that for a minute? A little bit about, you said that you've traveled considerably researching Warrenville. Where are some of the places that your search led you?
Well, Fredonia, New York. They had some old newspapers, and cemeteries, Peoria, Illinois.
Now, Fredonia is where the Warrens came from? Or?
Fredonia is the boyhood home of Colonel Warren and the other children. The older ones grew up in Madison.
Madison, New York? Or
Madison, New York. Mm-hmm.
Okay. In the Hiram Leonard diaries, you said that it mentions a lot of the things that you drew on to do the Warren Tavern story. Mm-hmm. Would those be available for research?
I made 3 copies. The museum has 1 copy. The DuPage, they don't have all of them yet. I have one for my own work copy. And these that I have bound, I'm going to turn over to the Warrenville Library whenever I get them indexed. And I'm going to write a synopsis of them.
This is an incredible amount of work. Now, why do you do all this?
Why do I do all this? Can't help myself, I guess. I don't really consider it work. In fact, I always am rather disturbed when I have to do other things, and I know that other things are first, and this is what I want to do, and I get impatient with things that are forced on me.
What's your next project, or your current project?
My current project is working on a program of Adam Emery Albright, which I'm going to give at the Historical Society in the spring. And
who is Adam Emery Albright?
he is our famous international